The message came through at 3:11 a.m. local time, routed through an emergency one-way signal protocol that the agent had been given for situations where no other option existed. One word, Sergeant. That was all. One word, transmitted through a channel designed for last resort contact, from an agent who had been embedded inside Iran's missile procurement infrastructure for 3 years. An agent whose identity was known to exactly 4 people in the American intelligence structure. An agent who had provided targeting data that formed a critical component of Operation Epic Fury's strike package against hardened missile production facilities. By the time the signal was received and decoded, the agent was gone. Not extracted, not evacuated. Gone in the way that people go when a hostile intelligence service has located them and does not intend to leave evidence. Gone like the 4 before him. The signals officer who received the one-word transmission did not know about the 4 before him. That information was in a different compartment, held by a different part of the intelligence structure, managed by the man whose name the dying agent had transmitted as his only act of final communication. Sergeant, not a rank. A name that the signals officer did not recognize, filed in a report that moved up the chain in the normal way and reached the desk of an FBI counterintelligence analyst at 9:47 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. The analyst recognized the name because the analyst had seen it before, in a case file that had been open for 7 months and had never developed past its initial flag. A file about 4 agents who had gone dark in Iran over a 2-year period. A file that had been attributed, in the absence of any concrete evidence of compromise, to Iranian counterintelligence improvements and operational security failures on the agent's part. A file that now had a name in it. The analyst pulled the file and read it for 40 minutes. Then, the analyst made a call that would open the most devastating betrayal investigation in the history of American Special Operations human intelligence. The 4 agents who had gone dark over the preceding 2 years had not gone dark in the way that sources sometimes go dark. Gradually, with reduced contact, with explanations that suggested personal caution or changing circumstances. They had gone dark the way sources go dark when something terminal happens. Contact attempted and not returned. Emergency protocols activated and not responded to. Follow-on contact through secondary channels producing nothing. Then, in 3 of the 4 cases, intelligence product from separate Iranian sources indicating that individuals matching the agent's operational profiles had been detained by IRGC counterintelligence. 3 detained. Fate unknown. 1 simply vanished. No confirmation of detention, no intelligence suggesting what had happened. A disappearance complete enough to suggest that Iranian counterintelligence had been careful not to generate any signal that might indicate the source had been found. The case file had attributed all 4 losses to a combination of factors. Iranian counterintelligence had been improving its operational security methodologies. The agents had been operating in high-risk environments. The loss rate, while painful, was within the statistical range that human intelligence programs in denied access environments sometimes produced. No one had seriously considered the alternative explanation. Because the alternative explanation required believing that someone inside the program had been identifying and exposing these agents deliberately. And the person who managed the program, who held the agents' identities, their contact protocols, their cover arrangements, and their operational parameters, was a man with 22 years of service, a record that was, by every measure available to the system, beyond reproach. The senior sergeant, the most experienced human intelligence operator in the special operations structure. A man who had built careers, saved lives, and run networks in environments that would have broken anyone less capable. A man whose institutional knowledge was so deep and so irreplaceable that he had been retained past normal rotation cycles 3 times in succession, because no one could do what he did at the level he did it. A man who had been selling his agents to Iranian intelligence for 4 years. The one-word message from the 5th agent was the first crack in a story that had been holding together for 4 years, because the man at its center was too good at his job for anyone to see what the job had become. The FB, a counterintelligence analyst who pulled the file on that Wednesday morning, did something that no one in the preceding 7 months had done, not because the information had been unavailable, because the framing had been established before the analysis was conducted, and the framing had been wrong. The framing was 4 agent losses in a difficult operational environment, attributable to Iranian counterintelligence improvement. The analyst reframed it. 4 agent losses in a program managed by a single individual, examined for evidence of common compromise. The difference between those 2 framings is the difference between a tragedy and a crime. Under the first framing, the losses are bad luck compounded by a hostile operating environment. You review your methods, improve your tradecraft, accept the casualties as the cost of operating in Iran. Under the second framing, you look at who held all 4 identities, who managed all 4 contact protocols, who was the single point of access for all 4 agents' operational parameters, who knew enough about all 4 to give Iranian counterintelligence what it needed to find each one. There was one answer to that question. The analyst documented the reframing, attached it to the one-word message from the 5th agent, and escalated to the division chief at 11:15 a.m. The division chief read the file in 20 minutes and made 2 calls. The first call opened a full investigation under the designation Cold Harvest. The second call requested an immediate compartmented briefing with the Special Operations Command structure to assess whether the senior sergeant had any current operational access that needed to be controlled before he received any indication that the investigation had opened. He did. He had full access to the operational parameters of Epic Fury's human intelligence component, the network of agents inside Iran whose on-the-ground reporting was providing real-time targeting verification for the operation's strike packages. Agents whose identities, contact protocols, and operational roles he managed directly. Epic Fury was 6 days from execution. There were 7 agents still active inside Iran. If the senior sergeant had already identified and reported any of them to Iranian intelligence, those agents were at risk. If he had not yet done so, he might do so at any moment, particularly if the approaching Epic Fury execution window created operational pressure to provide Iran with the most current and actionable intelligence he could deliver. The investigation that was supposed to be methodical had a 6-day deadline. What the investigation established in the first 48 hours answered some questions and deepened others. The financial picture was the first thread. The senior sergeant's documented income, federal salary, modest investment accounts, a savings pattern consistent with someone who had lived carefully and spent conservatively, did not match his observable lifestyle in ways that the first pass of financial forensics could quantify precisely. But the second pass, which pulled transaction records from accounts his financial disclosure forms had not mentioned, found a pattern. A series of cash deposits, small enough individually to stay below reporting thresholds, consistent in amount and timing, the kind of regularity that suggested scheduled payments rather than irregular windfalls. Across 4 years, the deposits totaled approximately $640,000, not in his primary bank. In an account opened at a credit union in a state where he had done a temporary assignment 3 years prior, under his own name, with a debit card that had never been used at any location his primary financial activity would have associated with him. He had been careful. Not careful enough. The deposits had a source, not a direct source. The original transfers had been made in cash at branches in multiple cities, a pattern designed to obscure origin. But forensic financial analysis, working backward through the branch locations and deposit timing, identified a geographic pattern that mapped precisely onto his travel history. Temporary duty assignments, training rotations, conference attendance over the preceding 4 years. Every deposit had been made within 72 hours of a documented travel event. Every travel event included time in a city where he had been physically present and where, the analysis established, a financial transaction had occurred. He had been paid in cash during his travels. He had deposited the cash in small amounts over subsequent days. The pattern was designed to look like nothing. It looked like exactly what it was. The communication analysis ran alongside the financial investigation. His government devices showed nothing. He had been too experienced to use anything associated with his professional identity for contact with Iranian handlers. But cell tower records from his personal device, pulled under the visa authorization, showed a pattern of brief location anomalies that did not match his documented movements. Short periods where his device had connected to towers and locations he had no documented reason to be. At times, that did not align with any known activity. The location anomalies corresponded to his travel history. He had been meeting someone, consistently, over years, in cities where his travel took him. By hour 56 of the investigation, the task force had a financial case and a communications pattern case. What they did not yet have was direct evidence of the transmissions themselves. Proof that specific agent identities and operational parameters had been transmitted to Iranian intelligence in a form that could be recovered and presented at trial. That evidence arrived on day 4, from a direction the task force had not anticipated. The fifth agent, the one who had transmitted the one-word message before going dark, had not been the only one to understand something was wrong. In the final weeks before his disappearance, the agent had taken a precaution that his handlers had not instructed him to take and had not known about. He had created a dead drop, a physical cache of documents in a location he had designated in a communication that had been sent not through the program's standard channels, but through a separate pathway he had established independently, routing to a contact he had identified outside the formal program structure. The contact was a retired intelligence officer, a mentor from early in the agent's career, who had been out of the formal structure for 6 years. The agent had trusted him more than he trusted the system that was supposed to protect him. The retired officer had received a package 3 weeks after the agent went dark. He had not opened it immediately. He had not known what it contained. When the FBI, following the dead drop reference in the agent's final communication, located the retired officer and explained what they were looking for. The retired officer retrieved the package from where he had stored it, unopened, in a safe, waiting. Inside, handwritten notes, dates, location coordinates, contact details, and, most significantly, a log the agent had maintained of communications he had received through the program's official channels that had contained information he had not provided and had not authorized to be transmitted. Procedural details, cover arrangements, the specific timing of a contact window that only 2 people knew, the agent and his handler. The handler was the senior sergeant. The agent had not known, with certainty, that the handler was the source of the compromise. He had known that information was moving that should not have been moving. He had known that the channel through which it moved led to one person. He had not known whether to trust his assessment or trust the institution. He had hedged. He had created the dead drop. He had sent the package to the retired officer, and then he had transmitted one word and gone dark. The package was the direct evidence the investigation needed. The agent's log documented specific procedural information that had been transmitted to Iranian intelligence. Information cross-referenced against what IRGC counterintelligence would have needed to locate and identify each of the 5 agents, formed a comprehensive evidentiary record of how each compromise had been facilitated. The senior sergeant had not simply given Iranian intelligence names. He had given them operational procedure, contact timing, cover layer details, the specific vulnerabilities in each agent's arrangement that, if exploited with precision, would produce a clean detention or disappearance without leaving traces that pointed back to a program compromise. He had not just sold his agents. He had provided the instruction manual for how to take them without leaving evidence. 4 agents were gone. The 5th had died transmitting one word. 7 were still active inside Iran. The investigation was on day 4. Epic fury was 2 days away. The arrest planning for the senior sergeant was complicated by factors that had no parallel in standard counterintelligence arrest operations. He was a trained special operations officer with 22 years of experience, including extended periods operating in denied access environments against hostile intelligence services. He understood surveillance. He understood counter-surveillance. He understood how investigations developed, what evidence thresholds were required for arrest authorization, and approximately how long a financial and communications case of the type the investigation had built would take to reach that threshold. If he had any indication the investigation had opened, he would not wait to be arrested. He would move. He had the skills and the resources and the professional knowledge to make himself very difficult to find very quickly. He also had current operational access. If he moved before being arrested, his first action would not be self-preservation. His first action would be to transmit what he knew about the 7 remaining active agents inside Iran, to give Iranian intelligence the identities and operational parameters of everyone still running, as a final delivery and as insurance against the possibility that his cooperation might be needed to protect himself later. 7 agents inside Iran, hours from the execution window of an operation their intelligence had been built to support. 7 people whose survival depended on the arrest being executed before the senior sergeant understood it was coming. The task force identified his location. He was at a training facility, not overseas, not in a sensitive operational environment, but at a domestic installation where his presence was consistent with his current assignment and where his daily pattern had been mapped through 5 days of discreet surveillance. The arrest was scheduled for 5:30 a.m. on day 6, 2 days before Epic Fury's execution window, before his morning physical training routine, before his first access to any classified system, before any part of the day that would give him situational awareness of his environment. At 4:47 a.m., the surveillance asset monitoring his residential quarters on the installation reported a light coming on. He was awake 43 minutes before his documented pattern. The task force lead made the call at 4:49 a.m. Move now. The arrest team had been staged since 4 a.m. They were at his door at 4:53 a.m. He opened it in physical training clothes. He had been dressing, not sleeping. He had a bag on the bed behind him, not packed, but items laid out in a way that suggested preparation. whether he had received a warning, whether his instinct had told him something had shifted, whether he had simply woken early by chance. The investigation would not be able to resolve that question. What the investigation could establish. He had not completed whatever he had been preparing to do. He looked at the arrest team. He was calm in the way that people with 22 years of high-stress operational experience are calm. Not the calm of someone who is not afraid, but the calm of someone who has trained themselves to function when afraid. He said, "Give me a minute to put my boots on." The team lead said no. He was placed under arrest in his physical training shoes. His bag was seized. His devices were seized. His quarters were secured. He did not speak again until he had an attorney present. The 7 agents inside Iran were notified through emergency exfiltration protocols within 2 hours of the arrest. The notification process, reaching 7 individuals in a denied access environment through channels that the compromised handler had managed and that were therefore assessed as potentially known to Iranian intelligence, was the most operationally complex element of the entire Cold Harvest response. 3 of the 7 were reached through primary channels and extracted successfully over the following 72 hours. 2 were reached through secondary channels, independent pathways that the handler had not managed and whose existence he would not have known to report, and extracted through emergency procedures that were, by any assessment, significantly more dangerous than a planned extraction would have been. 1 was unreachable. Primary channel, secondary channel, tertiary contact, nothing. The agent's current status is classified. What is acknowledged? The agent did not respond to any contact attempt in the 72 hours following the arrest. 1 was already beyond reach. Intelligence product received from a separate source in the 48 hours following the arrest suggested that an individual matching the agent's operational profile had been detained by IRGC counterintelligence approximately 16 hours before the arrest, meaning the senior sergeant had transmitted something in his final operational window before the investigation had moved to arrest that had reached Iranian intelligence in time. The timing was 12 hours. The senior sergeant had transmitted something within the last 12 hours of his operational access. Before the arrest, after the investigation had been running for 5 days, that had reached Iran before the arrest team reached his door. What he had transmitted. To whom? Through what channel? These questions were the central focus of the post-arrest investigation. His refusal to cooperate beyond the minimal required to establish legal representation made their resolution dependent entirely on technical forensics and intelligence exploitation. The device seized from his quarters, not the personal device whose cell tower pattern had been mapped during surveillance, but a third device, found in a concealed compartment in the bag that had been laid out on his bed, contained transmission records. The device had been active in the 3 hours before the arrest team arrived. The NSA technical team assigned to Cold Harvest spent 4 days fully exploiting its contents. What they found confirmed the worst assessment. The 7th agent, the one who had gone unreachable, the one whose status was classified. The senior sergeant had transmitted that agent's full operational profile, identity, cover arrangement, contact protocol, current operational location, in the 3 hours before his arrest. Iranian intelligence had received it, had acted on it. 16 hours before the arrest, the 6th agent lost to this man 6 lives across 4 years, delivered with the precision and methodology of someone who understood exactly what he was doing and had calculated, at every step, how to do it in ways that would survive scrutiny. The 6th was the last, because the 7th, the one who had sent one word before going dark, had left a package with a retired officer who had kept it in a safe for 3 weeks, because an analyst had reframed a case file that 7 months of prior review had misread, because an arrest team had been staged at 4 a.m. and had moved at 4:49 a.m. instead of 5:30 a.m. 41 minutes. The difference between 5 of 7 agents extracted and 4 of 7 agents extracted was 41 minutes. Federal charges were filed within 21 days of the arrest. The charge list carried the weight of what he had done. Espionage under 18 U.S.C. Section 794. Conspiracy to commit espionage. Aiding the enemy under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the same charge that applied to the Epic Fury Field Commander case, carrying the same maximum sentence of death. And, in connection with the agents whose detentions had followed from his transmissions, a charge whose specific statutory basis remained under seal, but whose existence in the charging document represented the government's formal assessment that his actions had resulted in deaths. That charge was not espionage. Espionage is the transmission of national defense information to a foreign power. What the government alleged in the sealed charge was something the criminal law addresses with different language. That language has a maximum sentence that has no upper bound below death. He was held at a military detention facility under the highest security classification applied to domestic military prisoners. His attorney, in initial public statements, described him as a decorated veteran of 22 years, whose service record would be central to his defense. The attorney did not address the substance of the charges. He has provided no cooperation, no statement, no acknowledgement of any aspect of the investigation's findings. His operational discipline, the same discipline that had made him one of the most effective human intelligence officers in the special operations structure, had not broken in custody. He was managing his legal situation the way he had managed his operational situation, with patience, with precision, and with a complete absence of anything that could be used against him. The investigation's evidence case would have to carry itself, based on what the forensic exploitation of his devices had produced, the financial case, the communications pattern, and the agent's dead-drop package. The government assessed that it would. Epic Fury proceeded on its modified timeline, with a human intelligence component that had been reduced, 5 agents instead of 7 providing real-time targeting verification, 2 of the 5 having been extracted under emergency protocols that had degraded their operational effectiveness in the final days before execution. The operation's results are classified. What is not classified is what was lost in the years before Cold Harvest opened. 4 agents across 2 years, attributed to operational environment factors, logged as tragedy, not investigated as crime. 7 months of an open case file that had the right facts in the wrong frame. 1 analyst who changed the frame. 1 dying agent who had trusted a retired officer more than he trusted the system. 1 word transmitted through a last resort channel at 3:11 a.m. Without that word, the reframing doesn't happen. Without the reframing, the dead drop package sits in a safe until the retired officer decides what to do with it, which might have been months. Without the package, the direct evidence of specific transmissions doesn't exist. Without that evidence, the financial and communications case takes weeks longer to build to arrest threshold. Weeks longer means Epic Fury executes with the senior sergeant still operational. Means 7 agents inside Iran with their handler still active and still reporting to IRGC. Means a 7th loss, and possibly more, and an operation built on human intelligence that the adversary had been reading for 4 years through the man who was supposed to protect it. 1 word: Sergeant. A dying agent's last act was to name the person who killed him. That was enough to end 4 years of betrayal, stop a 6th transmission before it became a 7th, and give 5 people a chance to come home. 22 years. The senior sergeant's career before the arrest. 4. Agents lost before the investigation opened. 6. Total agents whose compromise is directly attributable to his transmissions. $640,000. Total documented compensation over 4 years. 7. Active agents inside Iran at the time of the arrest. 5. Successfully extracted in the 72 hours following the arrest. 41. Minutes between the planned arrest time and the actual arrest, the margin that determined how many came home. 3 hours. The window in which the senior sergeant made his final transmission before the arrest team reached his door. 1 word. Transmitted at 3:11 a.m. through a last resort channel by an agent who understood that the system had failed him and that naming the failure was the last thing he could do. 1 word was enough. It had to be.